بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رسولا ونبيا ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك ربي أن يحضرون ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Continuing on with the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام's legendary military legacy, the era of Sayyidina Umar ibn Al-Khattab, his lifetimes, his era. We're picking up from page number 274 after completing a total of 56 videos. The name of this series is the legendary government military legacy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The legendary military legacy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a total of 50 videos, the era of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, and an additional total 30 videos of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam's legendary military career. Now picking up from page number 274 pertaining to the conquest of Syria, Egypt and Libya. From the commands of Umar ibn Al-Khattab, we may note that he defined the responsibilities of his commanders according to the principles of economy of effort in addition to flexibility with regard to aims and goals. We may also include from these orders that the first main goal was Damascus, although a minor force was dispatched to Fihl. The second main goal was Fihl, as the whole army was sent to conquer it. The third main goal was Homs. In accordance with the instructions, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah sent fighting units to Fihl, led by Abu al-Awar as-Sulami, Ammar ibn Hatma, Ammar ibn Kulayb, Abd Omar ibn Yazid ibn Amir, Ammara ibn As-Sadaq ibn Kab, and Safi ibn Ali ibn Shamil, Omar ibn Al-Habib ibn Omar, Labda ibn Amir, Bashir ibn Asma, and Ammara ibn Mukhshin, who was the commander of these units who headed towards Fihl. Abu Ubaidah set off towards Damascus, not encountering any significant resistance. The Byzantines relied on the local people in the regions near Damascus to block the advance of the Muslim forces, but they had no real enthusiasm for mounting such a defense because of the bad treatment that they had received from the Byzantines, especially in these small villages. The Muslim forces reached the fertile oasis of Damascus, Khotat Dimashq, where the palaces and houses of the Byzantines were located, but they found them empty because the inhabitants had abandoned them and fled to Damascus proper. Heraclius sent reinforcements from Homs to Damascus, sending 500 fighters, which was a small number that was required. The Muslim forces whom Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah had placed in the north of Damascus under the leadership of Dhul Qila confronted them, and a violent battle took place between the two sides, in which the Byzantines were defeated. The people of Damascus asked Heraclius for help, and he sent them a letter urging them to stand firm and to fight and resist, and promising them reinforcements. Thus their resolve was strengthened, and they withstood the siege. The forces on both sides, the Byzantine forces commander-in-chief Heraclius, governor of Damascus Nastas ibn Basturus, commander of the forces in Damascus Bahan, who had taken part in the battle of Yarmouk and fled afterwards. His given name was Wardian. The number of Byzantine troops in Damascus was 60,000, with the possibility of an additional 20,000 coming from Homs, and there was 40,000 fighters ready to intervene. The Byzantines stayed in Damascus, making use of its buildings, fortifications, and walls, and they may have been expecting reinforcements to come and engage the Muslims from the outside. The Byzantine forces in Fihl were composed of the city guard and the remnants of the army from Yarmouk, whose morale was very low because of their failure in the battle and their having fled therefrom. They were in this state of panic. The Muslim forces commander-in-chief of the Muslim forces, Umar ibn Al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. Commander of operations in Syria was Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. The commander Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah sent 10 of his generals led by Abu al-Awwar as-Sulami with an appropriate number of Muslim troops. The sources do not say exactly how many they were to take control of the road to Damascus as far as Bisan, which is known nowadays as Karbatul Fihl. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah sent other troops under the leadership of Al-Aqama ibn Hakim and Masruq, each to a different place in the direction of Palestine to secure lines of reinforcements from the west and the south. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah sent a detachment under the leadership of Dhul al-Kila to north of Damascus to keep a watch on the road that connected the city of two Homs, so as to protect this side and prevent Byzantine reinforcements from reaching Damascus. The size of the Muslim forces after Yarmouk was 40,000, who were highly organized and whose morale was very high after the victory at Al-Yarmouk. The size of the Muslim army that lay siege to Damascus was approximately 20,000. The rest of the troops were sent to Fihl to guard the front there. When necessary, they could be withdrawn from Fihl to support the siege. Description of the city of Damascus. Damascus was a great city that was named after its founder, Dimshaq ibn Kinan. It came under Egyptian rule during the 18th dynasty. It is the oldest city in history and was a center of idol worship. When Christianity came to the city, they turned its idolatrous temple into a church that was unsurpassed in beauty and splendor, except by the church of Antioch. To the north of Damascus lay the land of Al-Balqa, and to the south Golan, which is the mountainous region of arable and well-irrigated lands. Damascus was an important commercial center inhabited by Arabs, and the Muslims knew it well because they used to trade with it. The city of Damascus was a fortified city surrounded by strong walls built in stone 6 meters high and 3 meters wide. With strong gates, Heraclius had increased its fortifications after the Persians conquered it, enabling its gates to be closed firmly and surrounding the walls with a ditch 3 meters wide and into which the waters of the Barada River were allowed to flow. Thus Damascus became a fortified citadel which could not easily be breached. This shows us that the Byzantine fortifications of Damascus were very strong. These fortifications indicate the following. The fortifications of Damascus were not built in haste because the city was of significant importance. The Byzantines feared that they may lose it to the Persians, which meant that the efforts of Byzantine military engineers played a role in organizing these defenses, utilizing engineering experience and resources that were not needed elsewhere. In addition to the engineering knowledge that was available to the Roman army in this field, the Byzantine engineering genius manifested itself in the fortifications surrounding the city of Damascus, as the military engineers took advantage of the topography in building these fortifications, especially utilizing the Barada River to fill the ditch surrounding the city, in addition to other ways of using the landscape to make it a natural barrier to block attacks coming from the north and the northeast. The Byzantine leaders placed a great deal of trust in the fortifications of the city to such an extent that it made them gather their forces and take up a defensive position there, waiting for the Byzantine forces in Homs to regroup and engage the Muslim army. This means that these defenses that had been built by the military engineers played a role in forcing the Byzantine commanders to take up this defense stance thus they had a direct impact on decision making. It is very important to understand the importance of military engineering in battle. On the other hand, these fortifications forced the Muslim army not to attempt to breach the city of Damascus because they formed an obstacle. So the plan of the Muslim army was to impose a siege on this city. The historical sources say that the siege of Damascus lasted for 70 days, and it was a harsh siege in which heavy weapons such as catapults and siege engines were used. The progress of battle. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah set out for Damascus, organizing his army in the following fashion. At the core, Khalid ibn al-Walid. On the flanks, Amr ibn al-As and Abu Ubaidah himself. Cavalry, Iyad ibn Ghammam. Infantry, Shahabil ibn Hasana. Since the walls of Damascus had gates which were the only means of entering or exiting the city, the Muslims organized their besieging forces as follows. At the eastern gate under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid. At the gate of Al-Jabiyah under the leadership of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah. At the gate of Tuma under the leadership of Amr ibn al-As. At the gate of Al-Faradis was going to be under the leadership of Shahabil ibn Hasana. At the small gate, Al-Bab as-Saghira under the leadership of Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan. The Byzantines thought that the Muslims could not be able to keep up such a long siege, especially in winter, but the Muslims were men of deep faith and great patience who were able to withstand the changes in the weather. The Muslim leaders let the Muslims take over abandoned churches and houses in the fertile oases Al-Ghuta so that the Mujahideen could relax, and they rotated their troops on a weekly basis, whereby troops at the gates would change places with troops in the rear so that the siege could continue no matter how long it took. But the Muslims did not stop there. They also continued to try to find out more about the enemy and the nature of the fortifications. Thus Khalid ibn al-Walid was able to choose sites to breach the fortifications and enter the city of Damascus. He chose the best place. Khalid ibn al-Walid was able to break through the fortifications by choosing the best place where there was a lot of water, and made a rope ladder that could be used by the troops to scale the walls. Khalid ibn al-Walid knew that a son had been born to the patriarch of Damascus and that the people were gathered at the celebratory feast. The Byzantines were preoccupied with eating and drinking and were neglecting their duties, including the task of watching the fronts and the gates. When evening came, Khalid ibn al-Walid and his troops set out, led by Khalid al-Qaqa ibn Amr and Madhur ibn Adi. They said, when you hear a takbir at the walls, climb up to join us and head for the gate. Khalid and his first group crossed the moat in two floating vessels and reached the walls. Then they threw up the rope ladder, and when they were firmly attached, Al-Qaqa and Madhur climbed up, and then they fixed more ropes. Then the second group came up, and the first group went back down and went to the gate, where they joined the soldiers who were with Khalid. They said the first takbir at the top of the wall. Then the second group scaled the wall and headed towards the gate, where they broke it with their swords. Thus the Muslim forces entered Damascus in that fashion. Important lessons was the conquest achieved by means of treaty or by force. The scholars differ as to whether Damascus was conquered by means of treaty or by force. Most of the scholars are of the view that the matter was settled by means of peace deal, because they are not sure which came first. Was it conquered by force and then the Byzantines agreed to a peace deal, or was one part conquered by means of a peace deal, then the other side was taken by force? Some suggested that half of it was conquered by means of peace deal and the other half by force. This is more likely to be the case because what the Sahaba did in the case of the main church, which was the largest place of worship, when they took half of it and left the other half, and Allah Ta'ala knows best. The date of conquest, Ibn Kathir said the story narrated by Saif ibn Umar suggested that the conquest of Damascus took place 13 years after the Hijriya, but Saif also states the same as the majority, which is that it happened in the middle of Rajab, 14 years after the Hijriya. Khalifa ibn Khayyat stated that Abu Ubaidah besieged the Byzantines in Damascus in Rajab, Shaban, Ramadan, and Shawwal. Abu Ubaidah besieged them in these months. Then the peace treaty came in Dhul Qa'dah. What matters is that the conquest took place after the Battle of Yarmouk. Application of some principles of war. During the conquest of Damascus, the Muslims applied some of the principles of war, including surprise, initiating the fighting, making the most of the opportunities, and innovative thinking on the part of field commanders. We have seen what Khalid ibn al-Walid did when he sent out scouts and looked for the best place to breach the walls, and how that affected the situation and changed the siege into an attack. If we compare what Khalid ibn al-Walid did, using rope ladders to climb over the walls in Damascus, with what the Egyptian army did in October War of 1973 of CE, when they crossed They crossed over Israel's Bar-Lev line and used rope ladders to reach the enemy's defensive positions. We will realize that it was the same tactic. This demonstrates to us the brilliance of the Muslim during the Islamic conquest, and our modern battles are not more than an extension of this brilliance. Conquest of other parts of Syria and Damascus. After the conquest of Damascus, Abu Ubaidah sent Khalid ibn al-Walid to Al-Biqa, which was conquered by the sword, and he sent out a party which met with the Byzantines in Ain Misnoon. The Byzantines were led by a man called Sinan, who descended upon the Muslim front Aqabat Beirut. A number of Muslims were killed that day, so Ain Misnoon became known as Ain al-Shuhada, the spring of the martyrs. Abu Ubaidah appointed Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan in charge of Damascus during his absence, and Yazid sent Dihya ibn Khalifa to Tadmur with a detachment of troops to conquer it. He also sent Abu al-Zahra al-Qushayri to Al-Bathaniya and Hawariyan, where he made peace treaties with their people. Shahrabil ibn Hassan conquered all of Jordan by force, except Tiberias, with whose people he made a peace treaty. Khalid took over the land of Al-Biqa, and the people of Baalbek all asked him for a peace treaty, and he wrote a document for them. The Battle of Fihl. The troops whose job it was to attack the city of Fihl headed towards the south. When they drew near the city, the Byzantine forces numbered nearly 100,000, most of whom had come from Homs, were joined by troops from other cities that had been defeated in previous battles. When the Muslim troops who were to besiege Fihl under the leadership of Umar ibn Mukhshin reached the city, they were confronted by the Byzantines, who dug ditches from Lake Tiberias and directed the water to the area surrounding Fihl with the aim of blocking the Muslim army, especially the cavalry. This is a tactic that is used nowadays against armored vehicles. Thus, the Muslim cavalry was blocked, and the Byzantines turned this mud into a defensive line that protected Fihl, even though it is located on a flat plain. If this plain had been dry, the Muslims would have been able to attack the city easily, for they were the most able of people in fighting desert battles. Umar ibn Mukhshin stopped and ordered his troops to besiege Fihl instead of attacking it. Due to the big difference in numbers between the forces and the difficulty of attacking, as well as the inability to cross the water barrier that the Byzantines had created, so the Muslims limited themselves to imposing a siege on the city of Fihl, in which the Byzantines were barricaded, until Abu Ubaidah had completed the conquest of the capital Damascus, and was able to bring his army to join the army of Abu al-Arwar as-Sulami, whereupon Abu Ubaidah reorganized his troops in the following manner. The vanguard under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid, the right flank under the leadership of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah himself, the left flank under the leadership of Amr ibn al-As, the cavalry under the leadership of Dirar ibn al-Azura, the infantry under the leadership of Iyad ibn Ghamam, general commander of troops, went to Shahrabil ibn Hasana because the site of the battle was in the area that was under his command. Shahrabil ibn Hasana took command, then he reorganized the troops and supply lines and set out a plan to keep them in an ongoing state of readiness, prepared to face emergencies at any moment, day or night. The Muslim siege of Fihl lasted for a long time, and the Byzantines thought that they would be able to take the Muslims by surprise and launch a decisive attack on them by night. The Byzantines, led by Saqlab ibn Miqraq, attacked the Muslims, who rose up against them as one because they were in a constant state of complete readiness. The battle lasted until daybreak and then went on all day until night fell. When it grew dark, the Byzantines fled and their leader was killed. The Muslims set out in pursuit and drove them in their defeat to that muddy area that had been prepared for Muslims for the attacking Byzantine army. Chaos ensued as the defeated troops fell into the water barrier that they themselves had made around Fihl. The Muslims pursued them and none of them escaped except a few. The Byzantine force that had been besieged was utterly destroyed. After which the Muslims continued with their original plan, according to which they sent Shahrabil ibn al-Hasana to Jordan and Amr ibn al-As to Palestine. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah and Khalid ibn al-Walid set off for Homs, and when they reached Marj al-Rum, there was a bloody battle in which the plain was strewn with bodies of the slain. During this battle, the Muslims managed to apply an important principle of warfare when the Byzantines' vanguard engaged the Muslim vanguard. When Tudra realized that the vanguard of his army had engaged the Muslim army, he turned around and headed towards Damascus. When the Muslims realized what was happening, they studied the situation, and Abu Ubaidah decided to send a force under the leadership of Khalid ibn al-Walid to chase Tudra and attack him from behind, whilst Abu Ubaidah stayed where he was, fighting the Byzantine troops at the same time. The Muslim scouts managed to find out the direction in which Tudra was heading, so the troops of Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan intercepted him. As soon as the fighting started between Tudra and the troops of Yazid ibn Abi Sufyan, Khalid ibn al-Walid launched a surprise attack on the Byzantines from behind, and the forces of Tudra were utterly destroyed. The conquest of Baisan in Tabariya. Abu Ubaidah and Khalid, along with their troops, set off towards Homs as ordered by the Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Abu Ubaidah left Shahrabil ibn al-Hasana in charge of Jordan. Shahrabil ibn al-Hasana, accompanied by Amr ibn al-As, went and laid siege to Baisan, where the people came out to fight him, and he killed a large number of them. Then they made a peace deal with him on the same terms as Damascus. He imposed the jizya on them and the kharaj on their lands. Abu al-Awar al-Sulami did likewise with the people of Tabariya. The Battle of Homs. Abu Ubaidah continued pursuing the fleeing Byzantines as far as Homs, where he laid siege to the city. He was joined by Khalid ibn al-Walid, and they intensified the siege at a time of intense cold. The people of the city bore it patiently, hoping that the Muslimin, the Mujahideen, would go away because of the intense cold, but the Sahabas exhibited a great deal of patience. More than one commentator stated that among the Byzantines were those whose feet fell off of their leather boots, whilst the Sahabas wore nothing on their feet but sandals. But no harm came to their feet or their toes. Some of the elders of Homs suggested that they should make a peace deal, but the people refused, saying, "Our king is nearby." It is said that one day the Sahaba said a takbir that shook the city, and there was an earthquake that cracked some of the walls. Then they said another takbir, and some of the houses collapsed. The common folk came to their leaders and said, "Do you not see what has happened to us and the situation we are in? Why don't you make a deal with these people on our behalf?" So they made a peace deal on the same terms as Damascus, on the basis that they would give the Muslimin half of their houses, and the kharaj would be paid on the land, and the jizya would be taken from individuals according to their means. Abu Ubaidah sent the khums and the good news of the conquest to Umar ibn al-Khattab with Abdullah ibn al-Mas'ud, and Abu Ubaidah stayed in Homs with a huge army, along with a number of leaders such as Bilal and Al-Miqdad. Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah wrote to Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab, telling him that Heraclius has stopped the flow of water to Al-Jazira, and that the water appeared sometimes and disappeared sometimes. Umar sent word to him, telling him to stay where he was. Inshallah, we will stop here at the bottom of page number 286. And I think that this portion will lead to the final hours of Sayyidina Umar bin al-Khattab. And of course, at that point, we want to continue with Sayyidina Uthman bin Affan. Subhanak Allahumma bihamdik wa tabaraka asmu rabbik wa ta'ala jadduk wa la ilaha ghayruka wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-aliyyil azim. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.